Hello everyone, my name is Nicole Fegan and I watched 13 films in August. My life is finally rooted and non-chaotic enough for me to be able to do these every month, so I'm just gonna talk you through the 13 films that I watched this month, and they were really good. I had like a really good month. The lowest rating I have is a 2.5 and I have like a shit ton of 4.5, so let's just dive into them. Up first we have City Lights. This is directed by and starring Charlie Chaplin, released in 1931, and I gave this 4 stars. This is a silent film about a poor, penniless man who falls in love with this blind flower girl, and also at the same time he befriends this like alcoholic rich guy millionaire. The only other Chaplin I've seen is Modern Times, and I liked this a lot better than Modern Times. I find Chaplin's style of comedy, just like the slapstick comedy, it's not really my thing. Like, I can look back and understand why it was funny at the time, but like, I don't find it actively funny, so I think when I watch his films, I kind of look for what's underneath that, like the story he's telling and the acting and the filmmaking. And I found that the romance of this film is centered on between Chaplin and the flower girl, really moving and interesting, both in just like a pure romance side and also like the class commentary of pretty much the whole movie. I'm really excited to see more Chaplin films because I feel like the more I watch, kind of the more I understand. And so we're on the up and up. This was a pretty good film. Next I watched The Favorite, directed by Yorgos Lanthimos. This was released in 2018, and I also gave this 4 stars. I don't know how it's taken me so long to watch this since like everyone and their mother was talking about this when it was released, but this is about Queen Anne, played by Olivia Colman, who has a relationship with this woman named Sarah? Yep, Sarah, played by Rachel Weisz, and that relationship is kind of challenged when Sarah's cousin named Abigail, played by Emma Stone, arrives. I think the way this film kind of establishes its period drama element and then like completely subverts the genre by being absolutely outrageous, bizarre, and like clearly centering this sapphic romance in a way that is like not exactly sweet. Like, it's a very horny and bizarre film. It's also not just that it's funny, because it does feel very intense at times. That final scene, there are a lot of amazing final scenes of the films that I watched this month, so I'm sorry, but this is gonna be just like a recurring theme, but like, I think the final scene wraps everything up really nicely because it does draw on the more intense parts of the film. This is just like so well acted. Olivia Colman in this is like insanely perfect, and I just had a hell of a time. Next, I watched A Woman Under the Influence, directed by John Cassavetes. This was released in 1974. I gave this 4.5 stars, and I'm in pain just thinking about this film. So this is about a woman named Mabel who is married to this construction worker, and she is very lonely and probably not all very mentally well, such to the point that her husband sends her away like midpoint through the film and then comes back. Those are the basic plot beats of this film. The performances in this are out of this world incredible, especially, I'm gonna forget her name, Gina Rowlands, who plays the lead. It gives one of my favorite performances I've ever seen in any film ever in this. Someone described the core relationship of this film as like two people who are so completely in love, not only with each other, but also each other's faults, that they're gonna try to make it work no matter what, even when they shouldn't anymore. Because I think this film is doing a lot about like womanhood and being a wife, but I really at least don't think it is as clear-cut as man bad, woman good in this relationship. Mental illness is a huge part of this film. In fact, it is very, 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 very difficult to watch at times, because Mabel clearly isn't doing well, but there's also this question of, is she like actually mentally ill, or is she just not conforming to the version of womanhood and wifeness that her husband wants, and so he's making her feel crazy. It's very interesting. It's very long, but to me it didn't feel like its runtime. It was like so horrifying that like the time just seemed to like rush by. And there are certain scenes that happen once she's back that I feel like are gonna stay with me forever. I don't want to talk about them, but like especially those last, what is it, like 30 to 45 minutes or something, just like wrecked my entire week. Just like a truly incredible film and makes me really excited to check out more of his stuff. Next I watched The Grand Budapest Hotel, directed by Wes Anderson, which came out in 2014, and I gave this 4 stars. This is my 4th Wes Anderson I have seen after, what have I seen? Rushmore and Royal Tenenbaums and Moonrise Kingdom, and I liked this one a lot, obviously. This film is about the Grand Budapest Hotel and a few people who have worked there, namely a concierge and a young lobby boy. And it's kind of a story within a story. People are telling the story of the story within it. And at the same time, the lobby and concierge boy the concierge and lobby boy get kind of roped into this murder and they steal a painting, and there's a lot of stuff. This film is the most Wes Anderson of films possible. It's not purely aesthetic, but it dives so hard into like the things that are considered Wes Anderson, the symmetry and like the very lush and detailed like scenes and what's that called? Just like production design and pastel colors, and it is so Wes Anderson. And like from what I've read, it seems like this was kind of his response to critics being like, you can't just make a movie based on aesthetics. But what he did here was he dove even further into the aesthetics, but also there is like a very human story that unfolds and like lies both like on top and beneath just the aesthetics. I just think this film reveals itself kind of slowly over time in a very effective way. First presenting itself as nothing but its visuals, and then like slowly getting you to care about its characters and about the hotel itself, and I just think it was very well done. Next I watched Raiders of the Lost Ark, directed by Steven Spielberg, which came out in 1981, and I gave this 3 stars, and yes, somehow I have never seen a single Indiana Jones movie until this year when I'm 23 years old. You've probably seen this movie, but if not, this is about Indiana Jones, who's like a professor by day and also like adventurer too, who the government tells him he has to go find the Ark of the Covenant. Yep, that's what it's called. But also he has to fight Nazis. I have absolutely nothing against this film. I don't really think it does many things wrong, but it completely failed to capture me. I usually find Harrison Ford very charming, and he is indeed charming in this movie, but like there was never really a moment where I entirely felt the tension. And like I think part of that is just action movies. Like of course the things that you want to happen are gonna happen because this is like a blockbuster action movie, and like given that it was a blockbuster action movie, it's very, very well shot and like well edited. I again have nothing against this movie. I just think it wasn't entirely for me. I'm willing to reevaluate it one day because it wasn't totally capturing me. There were points when I wasn't giving it like 100% of my attention, which I always feel stupid when that happens, but maybe if I was really giving it like its full due, I might appreciate it more one day, but that time was not this time. Next I watched Being There, directed by Hal Ashby, who's the guy who did Harold and Maude. This film was released in 1979, and I gave this 4 stars. This is about a man who his entire life has been a gardener for this rich man, and then the man dies, and so he has to now be a person. All he knows about the outside world is TV. He watches TV constantly. That is all he is doing. And also, I should probably say this early on, this is not like a pure realism film. There's some absurdity, some surrealism going on here, so like, of course, like, this man might have had, like, you don't have to worry about this man's childhood. All you know is that this is a man who doesn't know the outside world because he works as a gardener and watches TV, and now he is forced to be in the outside world. And everyone who meets him is so impressed with him. He gains the friendships of rich people and the literal president of the United States who end up coming to him for political advice, and he enraptures the world when he goes on interviews on TV, and it is just so absurd and delightful. And the first half of the film kind of like keeps you in this unquestioned bubble where like all the right things are happening for him, and it also almost makes me, the viewer, wonder like, well, am I the problem? Like, I don't understand why everyone's so charmed by him. But then obviously like characters arise that are like, well, this guy, like, what is this guy doing? Like, he's not actually saying anything. And I just think this film is commentary on like the white man and how like we will listen to the white man no matter what he says because that is the voice of authority. I think it's just doing really interesting things with those ideas and themes. I think this film's message is very clear without it being like obvious or hitting you over the head or just like telling you at any one point. And it is just a lot of fun with some very thought-provoking stuff happening as well. Next, I rewatched Five Easy Pieces, directed by Bob Rafelson. This came out in 1970, and it is not only 5 stars, but like probably my second or third favorite film of all time at this point. This film is about a man played by Jack Nicholson who comes from this wealthy family but is now living as an oil worker in California. He has to go home because his father is sick, I've now talked about this film twice on this channel, and we'll talk about it surely again in the future, so I'll keep my thoughts brief, but this film is funny and heartbreaking, and it showcases this man who is so afraid, who feels like he doesn't fit in anywhere and is constantly leaving what he has. It doesn't matter what he has, it doesn't matter how good what he has is, he will fundamentally leave it. And you watch the psychology of this man unfold in front of your eyes, and it is brilliant. I do not have the time to talk about all of my thoughts and theories and feelings about this film, so I'm just gonna give you some themes, and if these themes interest you, go watch it. Class and wealth and womanhood and manhood, both of them, and psychology and leaving and the temporality of things and being satisfied, and it's so beautiful. Next, I watched Old Joy, directed by Kelly Reichardt, which came out in 2007, and I gave 4.5 stars, and this, whew, just a bad 1-2 punch of feelings, man. This film is about 2 old friends, Kurt and Mark, who go on a camping trip to these springs in the Pacific Northwest as they catch up on each other's lives. This film begs you the whole time not to disturb its stillness. There are long periods of no dialogue, of just watching these men kind of like go through the woods, and yet when they have these conversations, it reveals this simultaneous closeness and distance, because they've kind of gone in very different directions. I think Mark is the one who, he has a wife and a child on the way, and Kurt is kind of like this wandering soul who doesn't really have roots anywhere. And I think this film is probably the single best portrait I've ever seen of male friendship and male closeness, because again, yeah, it's so clear that there once was this extreme closeness that like just dissipates through age and through worlds changing, and just like the fact that like men are not granted platonic intimacy in our culture. I've also seen people love this film for like its potential gay subtext, and I think one of the things that I love it so much is it kind of doesn't matter. You can see the love between these men as romantic or platonic, and I think it can be both at the same time. It doesn't matter, because I don't know, just like it's such a tender portrait of these 2 men and their relationship, and it is so beautiful. Next, I rewatched The Godfather, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, released in 1972, and I bumped this from a 4 to a 4.5 on this viewing. You've probably seen The Godfather. If you haven't, this is about the Corleone family, specifically Don Corleone, who is the Don of the family, and one of his youngest son, Michael, who is kind of like rising in the ranks of the family. I think this was even better on a second viewing, obviously. I think I was able to follow things a little bit better and appreciate some of the filmmaking a little bit more. The first time I watched it, I was just like, wow, I'm watching The Godfather, I can't believe it's been so long. And I didn't really have any kind of emotional reaction to it, just because like it's such this cultural touchstone, and I still don't really have quite like an emotional reaction to this movie, but I just think it's so perfect and like tightly created. This is another very long film, but nothing really feels out of place. And yeah, it's very good. You probably don't need to listen to me talk about The Godfather because you've probably already seen it. Next, I watched The Long Goodbye, directed by Robert Altman, released in 1973, and I gave this 4.5 stars because this is without a doubt the single coolest film I've ever seen. I was like, I'm gonna go buy 10 packs of cigarettes right now and smoke all of them by like striking my match across any wall that'll have me. This is about a detective named Philip Marlowe who is trying to figure out what happened to a friend who was accused of murdering his wife. Marlowe just has this charisma that is so unbelievably infectious, and like the noir elements of this film are awesome, but I feel like it kind of just feels almost not like a character study, but just like a guy living his life, and every so often like the noir elements of this film happen. It's funny, like the last 20 minutes or so really turn up like the classic things of the genre, with like the we gotta figure out what happened, we gotta find people. But I think the reason that works so well is because the film kind of reads as a commentary on the noir genre. It's also just one of the funniest films I've ever seen. Again, like this guy is kind of just like cavalier and cool and doesn't care for the things around him, and so like watching him navigate through life and have these like fantastic one-liners, it's just awesome. It's a really, really good time. Next, I watched Inglorious Basterds, directed by Quentin Tarantino. This was released in 2009, and I gave this 2.5 stars. I didn't like this very much. I'm so sorry. This is about a group of American Jews who set out to kill and scalp as many Nazis as possible. Also, at the same time, it is about this woman whose family was killed by like Jew hunters early in the film, and now is kind of trying to enact revenge. I think there were certain performances in this that were really good. I really love Christoph Waltz's performance. I think he was astounding and terrifying and funny in this. My biggest problem is I don't think there is any tension in this film because it's clear what side we're on and who's gonna win in the end. Because this film is comedic, and just like because we know we don't like Nazis, it's clear it's clear the outcome of this film from the outset of the film, which means that I feel like it relies on its comedy and its gore, which I feel like Quentin Tarantino is known for all the blood, guts, and whatever. And I just thought they were fine, especially compared to some of his other films. I didn't find it especially funny, and like the big there's blood everywhere scenes, I just like, it kind of been there, done that, especially with some of his other stuff. Someone pointed out to me that there are some potentially interesting things going on with the medium of film, because kind of like the climax of this movie takes place at a movie premiere, and that's like a very, very long scene, and so like as a commentary on film, this film might be doing things, but I wasn't really watching for that, so I feel like I'd have to watch it again to really appreciate that. But I found it kind of just boring, because, I don't know, outside of a few key performances, there wasn't a lot keeping me watching. Moving on to my final two films, which I feel like are kind of connected in weird thematic ways. And first we have Naked, directed by Mike Leigh, which was released in 1993, and I gave this 4 stars. This stars David Thewlis, who you might know as Remus Lupin from the Harry Potter films, or from V.M. Varga in season 3 of Fargo, which is one of the best seasons of television of all time. He plays this unemployed British man who's kind of hopping from place to place, having sex with women, raping women, and you watch like a few days in his life. He is nihilistic and horny and misogynistic and has no care for anything. This film is interesting because it is both very funny, it is a black comedy, and also very difficult to watch, because clearly this is kind of a vile man. This is not someone we're really rooting for, and yet he kind of, you watch him through these interactions where he uses charm to like find a place to stay, but also when he tries to use that same charm and like a guy putting up posters is punching him. And I just feel like, what do I feel? I think this film is interesting to watch because clearly the like moral, if we're gonna go black and white morality, which of course there's not, like this is not a good man, and yet not everyone in the film dislikes him. We see someone who, for a large portion of the film, he's staying at the home of this woman who we used to date, and like their relationship is just really interesting because you can tell she has a care for him while like he's off doing things that like she doesn't like. It's just very gritty and also very tough to watch, but I feel like incredibly well done. And this is another one of those films that I feel like has an insanely good ending. Someone compared it to the ending of Knights of Cabiria, but completely flipped. Just like no hope there, where at the end of Cabiria you like have a lot of hope. This was really good. Again, it's very, very tough to watch. There are scenes of sexual assault on film, like on screen, which I felt were kind of merited at points, but also if that is not something that you want to be watching, totally understand if you just give this one a skip in your life. Finally, I watched Blow Up, directed by Michelangelo Antonioni, which was released in 1966, and I had this at a 4, but I think I dropped it down to a 3.5, and I think it's gonna stay there. This is about a photographer living in London who accidentally captures a murder, and then spends a lot of the film trying to figure out what to do about that. The reason I feel like this is kind of spiritually connected with Naked is that this is also about a British misogynistic man who has a lot of sex and is kind of a gross guy but uses charm to get his way. It's interesting though because like this guy is like, the guy in Naked is like intellectual but has no prospects, and this guy also is kind of like highfalutin but like is always like photographing high fashion shoots or whatever. And the key difference, I think, between these two, no one asked me to compare these two, but just like I watched them back to back and so they're on my mind. The guy in Naked is like purely nihilistic. He believes in a world without meaning, but I feel like so much of Blow Up is about this search for meaning. Like, obviously, like, once he discovers it, he thinks he found that out, like, he spends so much of this film, like, he's dedicating all of his time to figuring this out, because I think other things in his life are not giving him meaning. It's kind of like how in The Sopranos, Tony is so invested in his ducks, because like he needs something to give him meaning, because other things in his life aren't giving him meaning. I feel like that is what this murder is to the protagonist of Blow Up. On a pure enjoyment level, I was kind of riding that 3.5 wave throughout, but again, like the last 7 minutes of this film are truly incredible, and I was like, wow, that was amazing. So it left me with a really good taste in my mouth, but I do think it's a 3.5, but like another final scene, just mimes playing tennis that I'm gonna be thinking about for fucking ever. So those are the 13 films I watched in August. Let me know if you check any of these out and if you have any recommendations for me based on what I liked this month. I'm very excited to be doing these monthly wrap-ups again because I feel like I can get a little bit more into the films. I don't have to be rushing through them. I'm sure this video was still long because, girl, I can talk. But yeah, if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and you will see me in the next one.